Josh here. I'm the founder of Iron Gang Fitness. And today I want to dive into a really popular exercise that you might be doing incorrectly, at least for the body part that you're trying to work on. And that's the cable crunch. So cable crunches are a great exercise for building the abs, but only if you're going to be doing them the right way. So let's break it down. There's the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. So I want to start with a super common mistake that I see most people make when they do those cable crunches. And the biggest one by far is you get too much movement through your hips. So if you're keeping your back too straight and you're not really allowing any movement through your spine, you're really only engaging your hip flexors, not so much your abs. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing, but if you're trying to grow your abs, then we want that rib cage, we want the spine to move a little bit. So I want you to think of it this way. When you're working something like your biceps, you don't just hold your arm straight out and hold a weight and squeeze the bicep and hope that it's going to grow, right? You take it through a full range of motion, all the way up and all the way down. Our abs are no different. For your abs to grow, they need to contract and they need to stretch just like any other muscle. So building your abs isn't rocket science, like some people may lead you to believe, but it's because we've been taught to think about core work without having the right context behind it. So for example, everyone knows about plank variations. Everyone thinks that planks are going to be great for their core, which to some small extent, that's very true. But really, planks are mostly good for some core stability. But if you're really trying to build a big, strong, defined six-pack of abs, then planks are not going to be the exercise that's going to get you there. So what really helped me understand the concept of building muscle was thinking of our muscles a lot like a rubber band. So if you're going to shoot a rubber band, you're not going to pull both ends of that rubber band at the same time, right? Because it's not actually going to go anywhere. Very similar to our muscle. So we need to have one part of our muscle anchored down nice and tight, just like we do with our rubber band, while the other end is going to pull or stretch. And then once we release it, or contraction, now we get those muscles to do all of the work that they need to do in order for them to grow and get strong. So when it comes to exercises like cable crunches and especially body parts like our abs, when we are doing these movements, we want to make sure that we're trying to pull your rib cage towards your hips and then pulling it away so that we can get those abs to contract and to stretch, taking them through that full range of motion. So now I want to take you through some variations that I use not only with myself, but also with all of my clients, because I can't just give a single variation to everyone and expect them to really hammer the technique down right away. So I have a progression of exercises that I use or progression of variations that I use to really help teach how to engage the abs and how to make sure that the body is set up in a position to where we can really leverage the abs more than some of these other body parts, like say your hip flexors. So as I go through each one of these, I want you to keep an eye on the form that I'm going to be using and the techniques, and notice how all these movements are going to be done in a controlled manner. Try and pay attention to the breathing that I'm going through, and I'll cue it as I go through it as well. And then really focus on how my abs are going through that full range of motion that I talked about. So the first variation that I'm going to take you through is the first variation that I take anyone through, and it's so we can eliminate completely the hip flexors from being a part of the exercise. So for this cable crunch variation, I'm sitting down, kneeling down with my hips all the way against my heels, which is going to, like I said, completely eliminate what's going to be happening at the hips. So I set the cable above head height, and I like using a straight bar or a curl bar because I like having that underhand grip, because as I'll explain later on, the position of the arms is going to make a very big difference here in feeling the contraction of the abs and some of these other stability muscles. Once I set the cable to head height, I really like using either a curl bar or a shorter straight bar because I like that underhand grip, because, and I'm going to explain this later on, it's really going to help set up some of these assistance muscles that are going to help get the abs to engage a little bit more fully. But once I grab it with an underhand grip, I'm going to inhale, pulling my chest up nice and tall, and a nice long, slow exhale. So I like to start my exhale before I even start coming down, because that's going to help, one, set my rib cage in a better position in order to actually move. And then two, as I get deeper into that movement, the longer that you can exhale, the more air that you can breathe out, the deeper that we can get into not only those six-pack ab muscles, but also into some of those deeper core muscles as well. And finally, notice that as I'm going through this crunch, my arms are going to stay locked in position. So once I bring that bar down to eye height, it's going to stay there. We're not doing a lat pull down. Once those arms are set in place, we want to keep them there, and we want to let the abs really do the work. The second version that I'm going to show you is one that I will switch on and off with the hips against the heels version. And this one is really going to be for some people who, if they have a hard time getting down into that kneeling position or feel really uncomfortable in that position. So we just do this on a lat pull down machine where we can keep those legs locked in nice and tight. So again, once we're sitting down, we get those legs clamped down. It's really, really hard to use the hip flexors to do a lot of the work. We can really rely on those abs, again, to do most of the movement. So once I get those legs locked in and I get that bar pulled down into eye height, everything else from that first version is really going to be the exact same. The breathing stays the same, and how I go through that movement, nothing else is going to change. From there, once I get my clients to really demonstrate to me that they can understand how to get those abs to engage, they can get the spine, the rib cage, and the hips to really start working not only in sync together, but also the next variation that I'm going to show you is the next level up from those first two that I showed you. And this is once my clients really start to demonstrate that they can create that separation of the rib cage and the hips, and they can really get those abs to contract. And I really like being able to see the breathing correspond to how they're going to be going through that entire motion. So now we're going to get those hips off our heels just a little bit, and we're going to get that torso into more of a parallel position. So now I'm requiring my hips to do a little bit more work to stabilize, and we can really focus on the abs once those hips are locked in place. So again, once we get those hips locked in place, once I get my arms set into position, I don't want either of them moving. I want all of that movement coming from the rib cage, extending, and coming down into our crunch. And then I have a third variation of these kneeling type crunches, and we'll get into a tall kneeling position. And now this one I use primarily for stability work. And this has a really good transfer over into things like squatting and deadlifting, especially if we're going heavy, because we need some of that co-contraction of the glutes and the abs together to make sure that our hips are going to stay in place, keep us stabilized, and to make sure that we're not getting our hips in anterior or posterior pelvic tilt. We keep it nice and tight. And with this variation, really making sure that we get your breathing on point and making sure that we get those glutes to contract before we start moving through the rib cage. Because again, we want to have those hips tied down, nice and tight, stabilized, to make sure that we're getting that movement through the abs, and again, not through our hip flexors. And for our final variation, we're going to go back to the left pull down machine, but now we're going to flip our body around. We're going to sit in a reverse style. And I like this version compared to doing it on like a normal cable stack where you're going backwards, just because I like the stability that you can get by sitting in the seat and having that knee rest up against your lower back. Again, I just feel like it's going to help keep my hips in a much more stable position. But by sitting in the opposite direction, now we're going to put a lot more of the focus, instead of on the crunch, it's going to be more on that stretch on the way up. So now that we have each of the variations taken care of, I want to dive into a few pieces of technique that I touched on, but I went quickly over to really help you feel those abs work way harder than maybe you have in the past. And the first part is breathing. So making sure that you're able to take a nice, slow, deep breath in, trying to fill your lungs up with air. So to do that, we're going to have to take that big, deep breath in through your nose. And to help you get as much of that air coming through your nose as possible, it really helps to push your tongue up against the roof of your mouth. Go ahead and try it. It's really hard to breathe through your mouth that way. But that's going to help make sure that we get the diaphragm and the lungs to do what they need to do in order to set our ribs in the right position. And then, like I mentioned before you start to get into your crunch, start to exhale, like you're sighing air out. So nice and slow and controlled. That's going to help, like I said, set the rib cage in the right position. And then as you get deeper into the crunch and as you're starting to lose a little bit more of that breath and that exhale, you're going to start to tap into some of those much deeper ab muscles. And I mentioned before about arm position and why that's important to me. A lot of it is because when you get those palms facing back towards you, it's going to help keep you from pinning your shoulder blades back together. Now, I know we hear it all the time that that's good posture, but especially if we want to get abs to do all of the work and we really want to get some really solid crunches, you can't do that when your shoulder blades are pinned back together. We need to let them pull forward just a little bit, wrap around the front side of your rib cage. So having an underhand grip and pushing those elbows out away from your body while we're getting into our position, that's going to help make sure that we get the serratus, or those muscles that are going to be right along the outside of your rib cage, which is going to help turn the abs on as we're going into that crunch. So we want to make sure that we get those set. We don't want to have those shoulder blades pinned way back. So again, I'm a huge fan of cable crunches. I really love them for building some really big, strong abs. And even with some rehab work that I do with some of my clients, we have to make sure that technique is on point. We have to make sure that we're really starting to feel those abs more than we do the hip flexors on the front side of our hips. So I really challenge you to give these techniques and these variations a try so you can really feel the difference and get those abs to light up. So don't forget to like and subscribe because it really helps me grow my channel.